Thanks for joining the Joss and Crowd podcast, where we talk about photography, business, life, and a little bit more. Hello, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you are going to be on my podcast here. I was really excited that you're going to be a part of it. I love all the things that you offer, and we've had several other people on my podcast mention you and bring up that
Oh,
they have worked with you. So it's going to be fun for anybody that's listening to my podcast consecutively, that they'll be like, oh, that's her. And hopefully they can work with you too and learn from you. So I had the pleasure of going to a recent event where you got to be on stage to talk about what you do and everything, Nelly with WealthCon. So that was pretty cool. We also have people that talk about her frequently on my podcast. So I'll also put links to her in the show notes. But tell us a little bit about your story, what you offer, and all the good things.
sure. So I am a doctor of nursing practice and a certified clinical trauma professional. And I run the CEO, or excuse me, I run the CEO. I do run as the CEO. I run the Institute for Trauma and Psychological Safety. So our mission is to help people really learn how their past lives are affecting them in the present moment, and give them tools and strategies and skill sets to be able to really choose how they want to show up in the present moment so that they can call in the future that they desire. So we really try to help people develop safe and more supportive and more mutually beneficial relationships, both with themselves and with the people around them in their home lives, in their careers, and just in the world in general. So we founded the Institute about a little over a year ago, and it's been, honestly, I wake up every day and I'm like, I can't believe that this is what I get to do for work. This is so cool um, after working 60 to 80-hour weeks as a professor and a bedside nurse practitioner for the better part of a decade. It's really fun to wake up and get to work with people for a couple hours and then hang out with my family and hang out with my kids. So yeah.
That's awesome. What made you go into this particular field after the
So
pivot and shift?
yeah, it was it's one of those things that during the journey I was like, what, where am I going to end up? What's going to happen here? This all feels very twisty, turny. And now I can look back and say, oh, okay, every single step that happened made sense, even if at the time it didn't look like it made sense. So I would say it's about half professional and half personal. I worked with a lot of critically ill patients, and worked in really critical settings throughout my career as a nurse and a nurse practitioner. And, there was a lot of trauma there, both for the patients and for the families and for us as the healthcare workers. And particularly in the pandemic, I was getting my doctorate during the pandemic, or actually I should say just before the pandemic started. I finished it up, and I was practicing after I just finished that training, and I was just looking around going holy cow, all of us are in these trauma responses right now because the world feels really unsafe and uncertain and scary and threatening, and no one knows what to do. And I know what to do. And in my current role, I can't do anything that I want to do. And so at the time, I hadn't decided to start the Institute yet, but I was like, I got to do something. I got to start transitioning out of working at the bedside, because I feel like I used to say I'm rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. like I'm going down on a sinking ship, trying to make it look good, right? Instead of actually, oh, there's an iceberg ahead. What if we avoided that? What if we, pivoted direction? So that was kind of what happened professionally. Personally, I got introduced to personal development work, oh goodness, 8-9 years back, when I was in my first foray into business, which was in network marketing. And I was like, oh, my life path isn't set. I'm allowed to make decisions here. Like, I don't just have to say, okay, this is what my parents said I had to do, or what society said I had to do. Like, I don't have to just take what's been told to me as truth. Like, I can create my own reality. And so as I started doing that work, I had panic attacks and anxiety and depression disorders since I was 9, and no one knew why. And I'll just put a trigger warning around this. I realized a few years ago, as I was doing this work, I had a remembrance of some really significant childhood trauma, of being molested as a child by a caregiver. And I was like, oh, this is why I feel awful all the time. My body has been repressing this for the better part of 20 years. And so I went through the really deep, gritty, hard work of rewiring my own nervous system and really coming to grips with a lot of what I thought was truth wasn't. And a lot of the people that I thought cared about me didn't. And that, plus the professional work kind of happening at the same time, I was like, okay, I know the personal value of this work and I can see where it's needed in so many places. So let's do something about it. And a year later, that's when the Institute was born.
That's awesome. Do you think that like people seem to find, I know in my experience that people find their message in the mess? Like if you hadn't figured that out, like all the people that you couldn't be helping right now, like, so there's a blessing in that curse. I mean, I feel like that's you're a walking example of that. Like you're helping so many people, and you could have just reverted and kept everything to yourself and got more depressed and had more panic attacks as you were realizing it. But you've turned something so negative into something so positive.
Yeah. Thank you, first of all. And secondly, most of the clients I work with, so I did business and mindset coaching for a while before I shifted to this, because I was a coach for several years before I started the Institute. And, you know, the thing that I actually said to a couple of them the other day, because I do more, yes, I bring in a lot of entrepreneurs and we're doing actual like trauma and mindset work. I said, you know, y'all, the thing that you want to do is usually tied up in like, there's a really big reason why you want to do it. The thing that you want to help no one else experience, the thing that you want to help people move through, the reason you're so damn passionate about that is because you've experienced it. You know how awful it is. You don't want anyone else to have to experience that. Or I like to say, I went the hard route, right? I had to figure all this stuff out on my own. I had to like piece together, what therapies do I need? What trainings do I need? Like, what support do I need? And I don't want anyone else to have to take 20 plus years to work through something that we could help them figure out in a couple of months. So I think, yeah, it's you working through your, like you said, your mess, like that's where the beauty of your work is going to be. And the more that I've deepened into doing my own work, the more powerful my coaching and my teaching has gotten.
Mm-hmm. I was just talking to an entrepreneur the other day, and I was helping her with something. And I told her, I said, listen, I don't like giving advice. I'm just telling you the things that I've experienced because I don't want you to spend 20 years, like you said, learning the hard way. And like, I learned all of the things that I have as a photographer and a business owner and a writer the hard way. And I don't want other people to do it that way. I published a book earlier this year about, I've had 17 surgeries. Like I got all the trauma too. Like I had to unpack a lot of things too. And I had said in it, like, I don't want other people to feel this way and to let them know that they're not alone. And I think sometimes that if we don't embrace our story and to help other people, it's crazy. Like I woke up the other day and somebody had sent me a text message of a screenshot of a person that I didn't know. And they're like, do you know this person? She just posted about your book. And I was like, that's so weird. Like when you start selling your book and telling your story and reaching more people that aren't in your own circle, you're like, that's why I went through that. And that's why I can help. And I think that you are a prime example of that, of like figuring out all the ways to do it and not letting people go through this alone and like unpacking. I think in 2020, there was a huge shift where people talked about trauma more. I remember having the conversation with my mother. Like I was down in Florida visiting with her during the whole pandemic lockdowns and everything. And we were sitting by her pool one night and I was like, Mom, you never thought that like maybe having 3 children under the age of 10 and your husband having a massive heart attack wasn't slightly traumatic to you? Like, and your daughter having a hernia surgery at 1, like a double hernia repair. Like there was so many things my mom didn't realize that was trauma. And then I didn't realize that was trauma. And just starting to unpack all of that. There's so many different things that people go through that they don't realize that they're being affected by it and they block it out like you did. What is something that you would suggest to somebody that if they feel like they're in a fuzz, should they start unpacking things like that? Or
Oh, yeah, that's a big question. I love that question. So one of the things that I tell anyone who comes into our space is I say, look, if your nervous system's not ready for you to heal something, it won't show it to you. The reason that memory came up when it did was because I had done a lot of identity and visibility and vulnerability work to that point that my body and brain were like, okay, she can handle this and it's time. And so when I work with clients, I'm like, because a lot of times they're afraid. They're like, what if I remember something? I'm like, I promise you, your brain is really good at repressing things that it's like, we can't handle that. And so this isn't work that it's not something to be forced, right? There's no, and actually that is one of our trauma responses as a society is like to try to push through things really fast because we value speed and we value productivity and we value like, get to the end as quickly as you can. This is work that really goes against that social norm of speed and results quickly. It's something that like has to unfold more, I would say. So whenever people tell me like, I don't have any trauma, I'm not interested in trauma work, I'm like, great, cool. Right? Yeah. Like fabulous. Right. And when people are like, okay, you just told a story and I never thought about that as traumatic. And now I'm going, oh, maybe I was just taught to invalidate that experience or normalize that experience. My emotions and my feelings around that experience weren't honored or noticed. And I'm having some feelings about that. Like, yes, if you're having that realization, like that's the point where I'm like, yeah, let's start getting curious. Let's start looking at stuff. And I think the biggest thing is a lot of people think that you have to go in and dig out all of the things. A lot of the work that I do with people is I'm like, look, we don't have to go into the actual event. We don't have to figure out exactly what happened. You've got residue. You've got evidence of whatever those things were on your body, in your body right now. So let's deal with like what's here with us right now. And if you have remembrances of when this has happened in the past, great. If you don't, that's fine too, because we don't have to dig back. A lot of people think you got to dig up the original event to know. No, we can actually start right here and move forward. And for about 50 to 70% of people, that's enough. Just validating, wow, you learned that you weren't allowed to feel your emotions, or you weren't allowed to acknowledge when bad things happened to you, or you had this thing that everyone pretended was fine. Like it wasn't fine. We can like address the residue of that, and you can feel better from that alone.
That's awesome. I think too, people don't realize that they had traumatic events in their life or traumatic days or weeks because people have just dismissed it and like that was their normal or their upbringing, like that everybody in their household had trauma and they didn't acknowledge that too.
Yeah.
I've seen that a lot.
Yeah.
I being a photographer, I do a lot of different types of sessions, but one of them is boudoir, and I think that that is more of a healing journey for people, and they don't realize it. And a lot of times it becomes a therapy session, and we like the community, we all joke that we're faux therapists because people start unpacking and they're like, I didn't know any different because my mom didn't know any different and my grandmother didn't know any different. And then they realize like, oh, all three of these generations have suffered this trauma that they didn't know that they were experiencing as trauma until they get older when they're around other people. And they're like, that's not normal. Like, are you okay? And they're like, oh, wait, I'm not okay. I've just learned that this shouldn't have happened to me, or and it's crazy to see it unpack with people, and they have that realization of they can still move forward and they can still have a great life just because they've had some traumatic issue, but sometimes it like seems to paralyze them. Do you have clients that can't get out of that realm and move forward?
Yeah. So there are four main responses that our nervous system has when it perceives that there's something threatening, basically either physically threatening or psychologically threatening. So either I'm going to actually get hurt, like my body's going to be injured, or if I act in the way I want to act, I'm going to get shunned, I'm going to get shamed, I'm going to get ostracized, like people aren't going to accept me, I'm going to lose what we say is love, safety, and belonging. So in any setting where you have a past experience of, oh, I acted this way, and when I did that, I either got physically hurt or lost love, safety, and belonging, the likelihood that you are going to, in the current moment, if something happens that's similar to that you're going to have that same response is really high. And one of those, what we call threat responses or trauma responses, is something we call freeze. And freeze is it's when we feel disempowered. It's when we feel helpless. And if you think of this like in the animal kingdom, this is when I always think of the fainting goats. Have you ever seen the fainting goats?
Yeah.
The goats that like they get scared and they literally pass out. That's freeze. So freeze is where we either lose consciousness or we get so like literally stuck in our body, deer in the headlights, where our brain is like thinking and running, but we can't move and we can't make a decision and we're just completely overwhelmed. And I actually, when I first started my trauma work with people, I was like, oh, that response doesn't happen that often. Now I'm like, wow, I would say 80% of my clients have significant places in their lives where they go straight into freeze. And it's usually somewhere when they were a child, an adult hurt them or harmed them either emotionally or physically. And even as this grown adult now, that little inner child part of them goes, it's not safe for you to do this. Even though you're now grown and you can make all your decisions and choose whatever you want, there's this piece inside of us that goes, it's not safe. So I see a lot of freeze response like around money, or in business. It's really common. I'll have people come to me and they're like, it's the weirdest thing. I'll be on a call with my coach. We'll decide what I'm going to do for the week. I will completely check out for the entire week, come back to the call and have no idea what we talked about. And I'm like, yeah, you were in a freeze state all week. So I used to go into a freeze state whenever my husband would yell. Now, the hilarious part is I would be yelling first. He's not the yeller. I'm the yeller. But I would yell first until he was like, I can't take this anymore. He'd yell back, and then I'd immediately go into freeze. And that was a reminiscence of my childhood, of one of my caregivers yelling at me when I'm like 4 and tiny, right? So it shows up a lot. And it is probably the hardest trauma response to move yourself out of. And the reason behind that is that in the animal kingdom, if you're about to be killed, and you go into freeze state, your body's like, oh, let's dump pain relieving chemicals into your system so that whatever horrible thing's about to happen to us doesn't hurt. The same thing happens to us whenever we go into freeze state. So freeze state actually becomes mildly addictive because our body gets used to those pain relieving chemicals getting dumped in. And if you start moving out of freeze state, it actually starts hurting. It hurts to move out of freeze state. And so people get stuck there really easily. And I think understanding that for me was where my work with my clients like deepened incredibly, because it was an understanding of these. It's not that these people don't want to move. It's that it literally hurts for them to move.
That's fascinating. That's probably like, I definitely know exactly what you're talking about. I've definitely experienced free state countless times. And I think too, that seems to be where people start lacking boundaries and self-care. And routines, and they get out of their alignment of where they're at because they're in they've made themselves so safe that they're hurting themselves.
Yeah, I think it's actually one of the places that as a coaching community and as a in the personal development community that we do the most damage, because we say, oh, you just have to push through the resistance. You just have to like try harder. You just have to like, why, you know, we make people wrong for not moving, for getting stuck. And that just adds to the shame and adds to the helplessness of like, oh, I'm letting this person down. I'm, you know, not doing this thing right. And it actually continues and deepens the freeze state. And so one of my favorite exercises to do with freeze clients when they come to me is, I'll say, do you consent to me setting some rules for you? And they're like, absolutely. I'm like, you are not allowed to work on your business for a week. You are absolutely not allowed to touch this. Don't touch it.
You just saying that gives me such anxiety about,
I know.
I don't think I could do it.
Well, and they're like, I'm like, I want you to see that you can choose not to move. And I also want you to start to notice those little bits of motivation when they are there, of like, oh, I do want to move just a little bit, because getting that intuitive nature back of like, oh. And also I draw on a lot of rebellious clients. So when I tell them they can't do something, they're like flipping me off and going, well, I'm gonna, you know, that's why I get their consent first. I'm like, can I tell you not to do this? Because the thing of it is if they come back to me and they're like, I didn't listen to you and I moved, great, right? Then I'm like, okay, how did that feel? What happened for you? Was it painful? Like, let's look at where you decided to move. Did you decide to post on social media? Did you decide to call? Like, what did you decide to do? And then from there, we can like use that. And if they also come back and they're like, wow, that was really hard. And also, gosh, that felt so good. It felt so good to give myself permission to just sit still. And I was like, yeah, you chose to consent to the rule I gave you. So you actually chose to sit still. And that is a piece of empowerment that most people in that state haven't felt for a really long time.
Yeah. So
it's empowering them to be like, you're allowed to just lay there frozen. And that's a lot, like, that's okay.
It's weird that we feel guilty too when we do that. Like, it's, if somebody told me like you could take a month off, Jocelyn, I would be like, I can. It's like somebody else has to give you that permission to proceed to take time off.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the coaches I worked with for over 3 years, she said something to me this summer, and this is what I've been working on. Because I go into a lot of two of the other trauma responses, which are fight and flight, which are basically, I'm going to run around like a chicken with my head cut off, doing all the things except the things that really matter. Or I'm going to like grind and hustle and push and strive and drive and
I know all
burn
of
myself
those
out.
too.
I know, right?
So I visit all of these things frequently.
Yes. Well, yeah, we all participate in all 4 of the trauma responses. But like but I was telling her that I was starting to feel overwhelmed again. And she said, you know, Lee, you have gone from working 80-hour weeks to working 25-hour weeks. And we've noticed that your sweet spot is about 25 hours. And she said, and that goes against everything you were taught. So it makes sense that you keep taking yourself back to this place of overwhelm because that's what feels normal for you. And I'm over here as like the trauma professional, like, oh, and I will be honest, I did flip her off when she said that. I was like, I hate you so much right now. And she's like, but do you notice that every time we get you feeling really good in your business, the habit is to start adding something else on or to shift something or to make it harder. She's like, you're so used to things being hard that you literally are getting uncomfortable when we make them easier. And so my intention and my goal for myself over the last 6-7 months and into next year is no more than 30 hours. No more than 30 hours. You get that, 5 hours of wiggle room above 25, but no more than 30 hours. And like, what else can you fill your time with that's pleasurable and fun? And so I've been reading I'm reading 6 books, 7 books a month, and they're fun books. And it's like, what I'm noticing is that my creativity in my content has gone through the roof because I have all of this really fun, enjoyable, inspiring, creative time outside of my business. And so it's so easy to pull it into my business now.
That's awesome. I feel like you said so many different things that I'm like light bulbs. Like, I totally get it. I went full time with my photography business after a very series of traumatic events. And I constantly do that. If I don't work 60 hours a week, I feel like I'm unproductive. I feel guilty. And a couple of weeks ago, there was one thing after another, and things just started breaking. And every time I touched something, my blinds broke. I opened up my blinds at my studio and they fell out. I'm like, what is going on? And then I shattered my laptop, my $3,500 laptop that I run my entire business, all my podcasts, all of the things. And so I just kind of shut down. And then within a half an hour, I was like, all right, well, how can I fix this? Take action or whatever. And as that week went on, I realized that I had to ask for help. And for me to ask for help is not something that ever happens. And I'm also a religious person. So I was praying about it, and I was I felt like God was ask your friend Danny. And I was like, Danny's not going to want me to help with Etsy shops. That's such a weird business thing. He's military. It was just so weird, but I knew he had he just got out of the military. So he has a little bit of downtime. And I was nervously texting him, and I was the worst he could say is no. And he said yes, and brought me food. And I literally told my friend, I was I have to remember today, because I was proud of myself for asking help. And of course he was we need to figure out how to streamline this. And he knew all these different things. And I was it's not so bad to ask for help. And I think it's sometimes he probably didn't realize how significant his 6 hours of helping me was. It's probably longer than that, but it was so great and helpful. And I think we tend to forget that we don't have to do everything on our own. I look back, you were talking about all of the different things with trauma. I had a series of unfortunate events, is what I call them. I talk about it in my book, but I had 17 surgeries. 6 of them were in 5 years. I lost my ability to have children. I had my face reconstructed, looks like a whole new person. People that I knew my whole life, I had to introduce myself to again for the first time. And I got tired of telling the story. So I created a whole alias so I could just move along and be oh, I'm Tiffany. Have a great day. Just because I didn't want to rehash this. And I started my business with I went full time with my photography business, 3 weeks after my facial reconstructive surgery. And it was a coping mechanism. It was something I could do. I had control over it. I was able to control my hours and and all of my things that I could do. And I've done some work on trauma and stuff. And it's crazy how you don't even realize, some people are oh, it was just a surgery, or it was just this or just that. And they're not. And I think I didn't even realize it until I would like nonchalantly be like, oh yeah, I had a complete hysterectomy at 30. Menopause is awful. And they'd be like jaw dropping looking at me. And I'm like, oh, this isn't a normal. This isn't normal. Like, and then I realized like not everybody was experiencing all these traumatic surgeries and life events that were happening to me. And it got really overwhelming. And like, I just threw myself into my business, which has been beneficial, but now like I've been in it for I've been full-time almost 8 years. I wrote a book, started a podcast, I photographed hundreds of people, but the pandemic kind of slowed me down when I had to be in my own thoughts. And that was just not fun. It wasn't fun at all. And I feel like I personally have been able to take it, learn, grow from it, and like try to help other people, but also like feel it when it comes. Mother's Day is always like super hard for me because I didn't get to be a mother. And I always wanted to have kids, and there's just something about it some years that I'm like, today's just not a good day. And I think I had to embrace it and go, you know what? It's okay to sit in your room and cry today. It's okay. It's not a big deal. Like, but before I'd be like, I can't cry. I have to be strong. And I think that that's what I see a lot of my friends with trauma, that they're like, it's fine. I'm fine. It's always fine. And I'm like, it's not though. Like,
yeah. I'm writing a book too. And spoiler alert, it's called It's Not Fine.
Nice. Love it. Can't wait to read it.
And you know, I the title actually came from, I don't know if you've seen that drawing of the dog sitting on the stool and the room's in flames around him. And he's like, this is fine.
On my phone. I send it quite frequently to my friends.
So I've been told that I induce crying in a lot of people, and I it's not intentional. I've done it since I was a little kid. And I actually have a kiddo that I've passed that empathetic ability onto. It's odd to watch. And the reason is because whenever people, like, I can just tell when people aren't fine, and I'm not forcing them to talk to me. And it's something that I used to do with my patients a lot too, or the families. They come in and I'd be like, hey, how are you? And they're like, I'm fine. I'd be like, and I wouldn't say anything. And I just stand there and like stare at them. And they're like, well, I mean, and then they'd go into it, and then we'd have like a 2 to 3 minute conversation. And then they'd be like, oh, that feels better. And I'm like, yeah, so many of us. So this is something fascinating I learned this year, which makes so much sense. As humans, our primary survival mechanism is to ask for help. The way that we as humans survive is asking for help. And I saw this in my work as a nurse practitioner. The patients who didn't have community, who didn't have people surrounding them who were willing and able to meet their needs, developed something we called failure to thrive. And failure to thrive is basically you give up the will to live, because your body literally says, okay, I'm not connected to anybody. What's the point? No one's going to take care of me. No one's going to help me. No one's going to feed me. No one's going to love me. It is the ultimate form of freeze. And so when we're born on this planet, the way that we survive is by crying and getting our caregiver to come over and feed us or change our diaper or put us to sleep or hold us or help us be warm. And it's something about the last couple hundred years. We were actually talking about this last night. This might be a little triggering for some people. And this is what I want to say is we actually use this method with our kids too. So I'm not shaming or guilt. I don't want anyone listening to this to feel guilt. And one of the research findings that's coming out is one of the most damaging things that we may have done to our kids is the Ferber method, AKA the cry it out method. So kiddos like me, the older millennials and on for about 20 to 30 years were exposed to this method of you just let your kid cry until they self-soothe. And nowhere in human society for like as long as we've been around, what was that a normal thing?
Yeah.
You kept your kids strapped to you all day. You slept in the same bed. We did all these things. And so when we said, hey, you can't sleep in the same bed together anymore, can't even sleep in the same room together anymore because we have to crib train you, right? And we said, cry it out. A lot of us developed these attachment styles with humans moving forward of, oh, I can't ask for help. And so it's one of the things that I see in a lot of people, like, you are not alone, is we've literally trained our nervous systems. It's dangerous, or it's futile, or it's actually a waste of energy to try to get somebody to pay attention to me because they're not going to. And I'm curious to just see what happens now that a lot of people are moving away from that. We're moving more back to, and it's so funny, we call it attachment parenting. And I'm like, it's not attachment parenting. It's human parenting. Like, it's normal for a kid to want to be connected to their mom. It's normal for a human to want to be held all the time.
I think too, like it teaches other things. Like I see so many, like I'm big on TikTok. I talk about TikTok a lot on my podcast, but I hate to like reference TikTok, but I just see a lot more videos on there. And I see people have a tendency to like start recording somebody that needs help instead of actually helping them. And I'm like, I would just want to jump through the screen and hold them and be like, what do you need? Like I'm a very empathetic person too, but I always wonder, like, were they the people that are having to self-soothe I feel like I'm talking over myself here. Are the people that didn't get the love and attention and care are also the same, or need love, attention, and care the most, are also the same people that will run to the aid of somebody that needs help, because that they've experienced that and they know that they need to console somebody, or they know that like the need is there, like they can pick up those signs. And I feel like people are so adamant now about just not helping people because they've had to self-soothe themselves. Like, well, I took care of myself, they can take care of themselves. Or I hear it a lot. People are like, well, nobody helped me, so I'm not going to help them. Like I couldn't do that.
Yeah. And I can understand that. I can understand that too, because think about this, like, you've had to make it make sense that nobody soothed you, right? You've had to validate the fact that nobody soothed you. And so, because if you didn't make it make sense that happened when you're younger, like that's trauma. And if you don't have the skills or the resources to deal with that, or if it's just been so normalized that you're like, well, this is how it is, then looking at that isn't either going to be a safe thing for you to do, or it's going to be something you don't even know to do. And so, I have a lot of people come on to my TikTok because I live there. That's probably my new favorite social platform. I've had people come onto some of my videos, and it's really interesting. I get people from two different camps, right? We talk a lot about empowerment. We talk a lot about regulation. So we talk about meeting everyone with compassion and grace and understanding and acceptance, not approval, acceptance. And then we also talk about how it's our own personal responsibility. Like, no one can make us feel something. No one can make us do something. Like, no one can strip away our power without our consent. And for a lot of people, holding both of those ideas at once is hard. And so we get people in one of two camps. I put up a video yesterday talking about how our feelings are directly under our control and no one can hurt you without your consent. And I had somebody say, but isn't this victim blaming? Because I wouldn't have felt hurt if somebody hadn't done this to me. And I'm like, what has happened to you is valid, and your feelings of hurt and anger and sadness are valid, and you get to choose how long you feel hurt and angry and sad and what you do about it. And then I'll have people come kind of like you just said on the other side of, well, we're being, this is why our world is the way that it is, because we're being too kind and we're like being too compassionate with people and they need tough love. And I always want to send so much love and compassion to those people, because I'm like, who taught you?
Mm-hmm.
Who taught you that it hurts you to be kind and curious and meet someone with, a non-judgmental outlook when they do something that you don't like?
Right.
And I just wonder, we talk a lot about at the Institute, like the bigger systemic ways that harm is done. And wherever you fall from a political or financial or, economical, whatever standpoint, hurt people, and people without community hurt people. And people who didn't have community, and a community that likes to hurt and harm other people comes along and says, hey, we'll accept you, we'll take you in, we'll love you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so much of all of the negative stuff that happens, so much of all the hurt and harm that happens in our world is because people are like, I'm hurting and I don't know what to do with this, so I'm going to put it on someone else.
Yep. I think too, I learned, being a very empathetic person, I had a tendency to put everybody else's feelings and emotions ahead of mine. And I spent most of my life living in that chaos. And I also talk about that in my book, where I was always raised, be the bigger person. Like, I think a lot of when I hear like childhood trauma, I don't think of it from an adult standpoint. I had a lot of bullying, and I had teachers that were bullies to me. And my childhood trauma wasn't necessarily in my family dynamic. I mean, there was a lot of fighting and stuff. So there definitely was, but I got to a point where I would just tell people like, oh, it's okay. And I'm like, they just made fun of me. They just picked on me. They were cruel. And then I would go home and I would sit in those emotions, and I lived there. And as I got older, I didn't want to live there anymore. And taking it and moving forward became a huge thing of my life. And I realized that I was starting to make myself sick. Once I got down that rabbit hole of like, why am I always ill? Like, I wasn't processing or regulating any of my emotions. My nervous system was always jacked up. I had went through a lot of things with my own friends that were traumatic, that they were not really my friends. So then it was like, okay, well, I can't trust my friends. Who do I trust? And just kind of feeling all alone, and learning how to regulate things my own and taking care of myself and unpacking it. And sometimes people are like, I don't know how you did that. And I'm like, well, I don't want to live there. I heard a quote once that was, somebody else did the crime, but you pay the time. And it's so true, but I don't want to live there. Like, I don't want to be in that prison of those emotions. And I see it so often when I have a couple of friends that talk to me about things, and they just get stuck in that pattern, where they just have that victim mentality that that's their life and they're going to be miserable. And I'm like, no, you don't have to be. Like, it can suck. Like, it can suck real effing bad, but you can get up and go forward. And I think that is a huge, thing that people get stuck in. Do you think that there's people that are not able to ever get out of that, or?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the saddest, hardest things for me to hold, is like, I can't make people, I can make people move. Like, I'm gonna like explain this statement after I say it. I'm a very manipulative person, right? Like, my job, my entire job, I like to say, is enthusiastically manipulating people with their consent, right? Like, people are really excited for me to change the way they think and they show up and they do stuff, right? I can use those skills to like force you to move if I want. And you're not going to stay there. And even if you do, there's going to be resentment. You're still not standing in your power if I'm the one who makes you move. Right. I like to use this. I always get confused if it's an analogy or metaphor, but I think it's a metaphor. I like to use this metaphor of, if you are drowning in the water, right? I'm going to row my boat right up next to you. I'm going to throw a life preserver out. I'm going to say, grab it. I'll pull you in. What I'm not going to do, though, is I'm not going to jump in the water with you and like let you drown me, or like pull you out to the side and then be like, okay, you're good, when you haven't learned to stop throwing yourself back in the water. Because you're just going to throw yourself back in the water again, and then I'm going to have to go in there and pull you back out. And so it's really about like participating in your own rescue is such a thing. And some people are either not emotionally or mentally in a place where that feels, they don't have enough pain in that victim place. And also that victimhood place can be freeze. So it might actually feel good for them to stay in that victim place. There might be some pleasure they're getting out of staying in that victim place. Maybe people give them attention. Maybe that's where people give them love and give them community, right? So if they don't have, if staying in that space doesn't become painful enough to them that they're like, okay, I do need to make a change and it doesn't really matter what it is, I'll figure it out, they're going to stay there. And that is, I think, honestly, it's one of the hardest things for me to witness. It's one of the hardest things for me to watch. And I have committed to, I'm not going to manipulate anyone who doesn't want to participate in their own rescue, who doesn't want to get to a different place in an empowered way. And I tried to do that a lot as a coach and as a clinician too, when I was younger. And I've realized that doesn't help anyone. And what it does is just exhaust me and burn me out. The other thing, you said something that made me think, I don't know if I'm going to remember it, but yeah, I will say though, there have been a lot of people that I think being really gentle with them and just accepting them and saying like, hey, if you decide to stay here, it's cool. They almost went like, oh, you're not going to try to force me out of this like every single other person in my life has. Mm-hmm. Or you're not going to shun me. You're not going to like ignore me or reject me because I'm staying here. Well, like maybe I'll join your Facebook group. Like maybe I'll come learn about this trauma thing. And, you know, a few months, years later, they're moving. So sometimes it's just people need time and they need to be accepted where they're at and to feel like you're going to love them and that they get to belong anyway, even if they are stuck. And that doesn't mean that you jump in the water and save them. It also means that you don't just go, okay, go ahead and drown.
Right. There was a video that I saw that there was a kid that had fallen out of a kayak and was just grabbing a hold of the kayak, just wailing, scared, terrified that they were going to drown, like hysterically crying. And the dad's just standing there and the kid's panicking more. And the dad's like, stand up, like literally stands up and he's in like 5 inches of water. Yeah. And he's like, oh. And it was like, wow, how many times do we do that? Because I think sometimes when people are in that freeze state, they don't know that they're in that freeze state.
Yeah.
And until they have somebody that's like, hey, stand up. Or you show them like, hey, you can stand up. It is a scary world to try to do that on your own when you don't know how deep the water is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think too, you had said, about the whole like throwing the life raft. My dad has always said, because I try to save everybody, that is a toxic trait of mine. I've had to get over that I know that I can't save everybody, but he would always tell me, he still does, like, you have to let go of somebody that's drowning because they will pull you under. And you'll drown too. Like you either have to get out and get them a life raft or like help them and calm them down, but you can't have them hold on to you because you will drown too.
Yeah, they'll pull you under.
And I think a lot of times business owners do that too, because they're holding on to their business while it's drowning and they're drowning, and it's like it's too much all at once and they're not realizing they're doing it. But it's fascinating, all of the different, like the freeze, the flight, what was the other one?
Yeah, there's fight, flight, fawn, and freeze. And the fawn is the one that I haven't mentioned yet. And that's the one actually right here that is, if you are somebody who likes to rescue, you are somebody that likes to be in relationship with people who do a specific kind of fawning. And this specific kind of fawning is called cry attach for help. So the way I like to explain this is I have twins, they're 10. And one of my twins, when she was itty bitty, and she was just crawling, would follow me around the house as I was doing stuff. And so I would walk into the kitchen. We have like a house that's central stairs, and then there's like 4 rooms connect around it. So I'd go into the kitchen from the living room and I'd hear her like crawling over. And then I'd see her peek her head around the doorway, around the corner of my eye, and she'd throw herself on the floor and start wailing. And I go, Charlie, baby, what's going on? Like, what? And as soon as I would pay attention to her, she'd stop. And then she'd start playing again. And then I'd move rooms and she'd come crawling around and she'd throw herself on the floor. And basically what she was doing was testing, when I get big, when I get upset, when I am quote unquote too much, are you going to love me still? And that is what a lot of people, that is the only way that they got their caregivers to pay attention, was getting really big or getting really upset, getting really emotional. And even if they got negative attention, that was still better than no attention at all. And so a lot of people, as they grow up, they learn the messier my life is, the bigger I am, the more emotional I am, the more upset I get, the more you're going to pay attention to me. Even if it's negative, I'll take that over you ignoring me. And so I've had clients that have this trauma response. I actually have this trauma response sometimes. We also call it like damsel in distress, right? It's, oh, please come save me because I'm so weak and powerless. And a lot of traditionally women will do this in order to attract a mate. Oh, I love how you take care of me and you're my savior and my hero. And the men are like, yes, I'm stepping in and doing this. And like, that's great in moments of actual danger. And if your entire relationship is based on that, that's going to get old pretty quick. Mm-hmm. So, I had a client that, or I've had clients that do this, like we'll start to actually make progress and things will be really good. And then one small thing will go wrong, or like there'll be a mistake and they lose it. And I have to remind myself, like, okay, they're testing you. They're testing you to see if they can get big, and if you're going to dump them or fire them as a client or freak out yourself and fawn all over them, or can you hold the boundaries? Can you hold the boundaries and love them at the same time and say, hey, this was a mistake. We're good. I've got you. And also, like, you don't have to get big.
Do you find that people like that tend to get in relationships with like narcissistic?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense, right? Because, and a lot of times these people, I'm going to say a thing that's very controversial. A lot of times people label traditional narcissists as the bad guy and the people who get into relationships with them as the good guy, right? The person who is sucking up all the energy in the room and the person who's trying to give them everything that they can. They're just flip sides of the same coin. They're actually both incredibly self-absorbed, because the one is, I can't feel good unless you feel good. And the other is, you can't feel good unless I feel good. Flip sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. So whether you're the narcissist or you're the victim or the rescuer, it doesn't matter. What you're both doing is basically saying, I am not okay unless you are okay, and you are not okay unless I'm okay. People, I've done a whole podcast on that. I've gotten a lot of really interesting feedback from that, because people are like, no, it's all the narcissist. And I'm like, look, if you watched my husband in my relationship, I am the more narcissistic one. I am the more, I like, if I'm not okay, no one's okay. He is the more, I need you to be okay so I can be okay. And I had a lot of like really guilty, shameful feelings around that, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm the one who's more narcissistic, until I had it explained to me by a really prominent person in the trauma realm. He said, it's just flip sides of the same coin. Neither of you got your needs met.
Yeah.
In the way that you needed them met. And this is how you learned how to get your needs met. And the reason you bonded so perfectly yet traumatically is because you were the opposite. So now you get to figure out how to meet your own needs.
It's a fascinating take on that. Like all of these like people are popping in my head. Different things like, oh yeah, that's making sense. That's making sense. And
yeah,
it's crazy how when we are on a journey too and we start growing, we realize like different things and how different people come in and out of our lives as we grow. I have a friend that one of our mutual friends passed away, 32, from testicular cancer. And when he died, her and I became closer friends because we bonded over losing one of our best friends. And we were talking one day about how she has every friend that she's ever had except for 2. Like she never gets rid of friends. And like she's very social. And I'm like, girl, I couldn't keep track of how many people I've gotten rid of my life. And I don't speak ill of them. They served a purpose in my life. I grew, they didn't, or they grew and I didn't, or like just different things and moving on. And I always picture it like a ladder. Like I've climbed up the ladder and not everybody can climb up the rungs with me. And as we grow and like we learn from it. And I think being a business owner has definitely helped me with that and grow, because it forces you, if you want your business to grow, you need to grow. Like you have to do the work on yourself. I think a lot of times that's why businesses don't survive after the 5-year mark, because it gets really exhausting. And like my 5-year mark was like right in the, like I've been full-time 7 years and in business for 13, but mine was during the pandemic. So I was like, this is we do or die here. Like your business is closed from the mandates, like all of the different things. And I went through a whole growing period and like self-evaluating and like dealing with all of the things that I had. And I think that it sucks to like lose your friends and stuff, but if you can't like give them the life raft to join you out on the boat and have a party, then you just have to let them go. And I think that's a hard time when people don't want to do the work, because it'll piss off family members, it'll upset relationships, it rocks the boat. And I think I'm fortunate that I don't have a husband or kids that are in the mix that I can grow on my own pace. But I look back, like I lived an alcoholic for almost a decade. And I was always like, maybe if I show him that I'm a good person, like, and as on the other side of it, like I still pray for him constantly and I wish him well. I don't know what he's doing, but those are demons that I will never get to fight for him. Like I cannot fight those demons. And I realized that also helps me with some of the battles that I pick in my business, where I'm like, that is not a battle that I want to fight. Let's move along and get something else, because not everything is black and white for everybody. Not everybody has the same timelines. Not everybody has the same goals. And I just want to be a better person than I was yesterday. And like show by example. And like, I'm not perfect by any means, but I had a lot of shit handed to me on a big plate sometimes. And if I can get through it, I want other people to know that I can get through it. Do you think that is something, not to like be therapy, but like working with people, do you think that happens a lot with people that go through trauma, that they end up wanting to help other people, or like that's just...
I would say the vast majority of people who end up in the helping professions is because they're like, I experienced this. This was hard. I want to help other people not experience this. So many, we call it reenactment in the trauma world. So reenactment is basically when I was younger, I went through this traumatic experience and it didn't go the way that I wanted it to. And so now I'm going to recreate opportunities for myself to change the outcome. And the problem with that is that, again, it's addictive. You get stuck in it. And so often you can't fix the original thing by recreating the event a lot of times, because it's not the same, and it's not going to like hit the same button as it would if you could go back and do it differently. And I remembered what I wanted to say. You're talking about the pandemic and like how it got quiet for you, and calmer, less busy. My business 4 times during the pandemic, that was how I was able to leave my job, because I had all of these people that were like, I'm not okay. I can't keep myself distracted. I'm stuck in a house with this partner that I've been telling myself I'm happy with for the last 20 years. And now that I'm around them all the dang time, like I'm not happy, they're not happy. And I think that those are the moments where you go, okay, am I going to continue to recreate this or reenact this, or am I going to choose something different? Right? Am I going to go back down the path of I'm going to just numb and dissociate myself out of this? Like, and by the way, what I thought was really fascinating with the pandemic of like how they, at least the Ohio government was like, oh my gosh, we cannot shut down alcohol sales. We cannot shut down alcohol sales right now. Whatever we need to do, that's an essential business, because people were like, I have to numb. This feels scary and I have to numb. And I'm not advocating for us to numb with alcohol, but I was like, this makes so much sense, because we've taken away so many of the ways that people check out.
Yeah.
Whether it's through work or through, and we've also taken away community. Mm-hmm. We labeled I still get a little on a soapbox around this. We labeled staying away from people as social distancing. And I was like, whoever came up with that term, I would like to meet them one day and have a really stern conversation, because what we should have called that was physical distancing. Because when we said social distancing and we made it scary for people to connect and be part of community, that we are never going to be able to measure how much damage that did.
Oh, for sure. And for decades of damage, like those kids that were learning how to walk and to talk and learning from their peers and their families. And I watched a video on TikTok where a girl had taken her daughter into the grocery store the first time and she looked terrified. She was like 4. And I'm like, that's going to be some long-term damage.
I know. And I'm like, and not even to get into like, if you think that the policies or the decisions that were made were right or wrong, it was the languaging around it of this is what it means to be in community. And if you don't participate in this, you are hurting the community. And also the actual languaging is hurting us. And so I really struggled. And this is part of the reason I left the bedside as well, talking about wanting to be able to help, like when you experience trauma, wanting to be able to help people. I was like, I can't help people. I had a particular patient that they lived 90% of their lives outdoors, like backwoods Ohio, and got cancer and had to come in for a bone marrow transplant, a stem cell transplant. And they were going to be admitted for 8 weeks. And they were a solo parent to their kid. So their kid was staying with a relative. And they told this man that he could not go outside on the balcony. And because it was quote unquote policy right now while we're figuring out what's happening with COVID. And I got called up to his room because he was threatening to rip out a central line, which is like a deeply placed IV in your chest. He was threatening
they do ports normally, right?
Yeah. He was threatening to pull it out, which like would have been a huge emergency. And leave against medical advice. And I spent an hour in this man's room, like hearing about all the trauma he's been through in his life. And he's telling me the one way I've always dealt with my emotions is I go outside and I feel them in the open air and I move and I breathe. And he's like, you are telling me that not only can I not see my family or anyone that I love for 8 weeks, but I can't even walk outside and get fresh air. And I worked night shift, and so I was like kind of part of the team, but not part of the team. And I was like, look, I'm going to write an email to people and I'm probably going to get in trouble for this email. And I don't care. I was like, and I went to administration. I said, basically, if you tell this man that he cannot go outside, you are doing way more risk than benefit. And us saying to our patients, like, oh, we're going to limit contact with you as much as possible and stay in your rooms. And to the nurses, like, don't get close to people and all of these things. Like, I was like, what are these people's health outcomes going to be?
Yeah.
And I just started, it just started feeling like I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm saving your life physically, and also what's happening to you mentally, emotionally, like spiritually. So with the business taking off the way that it did and experiencing all of that in the hospital, we had plenty of outcomes where it was just like, it's like, I don't know that what we are doing is helping.
Right.
So that is the other piece of it, is like the reenactment for me stopped working. I was like, I can't relive and fix my past traumas right now because I can't even make a difference. I can't do what I would love to do here.
Especially when you're aware that it's doing more harm than it is good. Like, I'm sure there's research that shows that it's healthier to be outside and the sunlight and the grounding and nature to heal. And now you're isolating people. That's not going to help them. They're going to go into that mode of, what's my purpose of living, which I feel like a lot of people went through in 2020.
Failure to thrive. It's how on, like, what is the point, right? What's the point?
I went septic. I forget what year it was. It was one of the whole surgeries fiasco problems I had. And I was in the hospital, and this woman came in and she was getting ready to give me a shot in my stomach. And I was like, what's that for? And she's like, oh, it's so you don't get blood clots. And I was like, I decline it. And she was like, well, you're not up moving around. And I was like, then let's go for a walk. She's like, well, your immune system's really weak. And I'm like, my immune system's been weak since I was a kid. Like, I have an autoimmune, and like, I want to get up and walk. And she's like, oh, it might be hard for you. And I'm like, I don't want that shot. So like every day they just kept giving me more things, and they would come in and they were like, you need to have a potassium drip. And I was like, why? Like, and they're like, well, it's because you're not moving. And I was like, so it's day 7 and I'm not getting any better is what you're telling me. And they're like, well, no. And I was like, then I want to check myself out. And they're like, well, you can't. And I'm like, I'm not going to die sitting in a hospital bed. I'm going to be around my dog that loves me because she has no idea where I'm at. And I'm going to go home and I'm going to sit in the sunlight on my patio. Like, I got out, and within 24 hours, like, I started feeling better, not even with these IVs and everything. And I felt like that. I felt like I was getting worse because I was captive in a room that had no window, in a hospital with people that weren't listening. And I don't recommend that, obviously. Like, sometimes people need medical care. Like, I'm not telling you to check yourself out of a hospital, but I had just made that executive decision that that's not where my story was going to end, that I wanted to get out and get better. And like, I ended up having my gallbladder removed. We figured out it was my gallbladder that was infected. And I literally yelled at every doctor. I'm like, I know that it is my gall, like, it's this area. Like, I know where it's at. Listen to me. And he was just so adamant. He's like, whatever, like, we'll take it if that's what you think it is. And like, I had went through so many different testing and I felt so much better afterwards. But it's crazy how in 2020 that's what I kept thinking about. I kept thinking about my situation trapped, and I'm like, how many people are trapped that they can't see their families right now? Like I
Yeah.
wasn't thriving, I wasn't doing well, and I had my mom there visiting every day, but I needed to be around my dog. As soon as my dog alerted my mom that I was not well. Like I had called her, we'll go short story of it, but I had called her and said like, I'm not feeling well. Can you come by? I just want to take a nap, but I don't want to sleep very long because I feel like I'm not going to wake up again. And she was like, that's an odd thing to say, Jocelyn. And I'm like, well, that's what I'm feeling. Like, I just feel like something's off, but I want to shut my eyes. So she's like, yeah, I can. I was like, don't let me sleep longer than half an hour. And she's like, okay. Well, I started falling asleep, and like I tried to self-medicate, and like I Tylenol, all the things, and my dog started making these weird noises that she never did prior and she never did again. And at that point, my mom had come in my room and she was like, I don't think you're well. And at that point, by the time that she got me to the emergency room, I collapsed and they lifted my arm up to check me in. And that's the last thing I remember. Like they scanned my finger and then I was admitted. So like my dog was my lifeline. Like I needed to be around her. And as soon as I was around her, I started thriving again. And like 2020 just isolated so many people. And I just kept worrying about everybody's mental health. And mine was not great. Like I was a business owner with no support, didn't get really benefits. I was infuriated when our governor raffled off $5 million to 5 people for getting a medication that like not everybody could even, I didn't qualify for it, wouldn't have taken it even if I had, which is a whole other topic. But like there were so many people that were struggling. Like I had a friend that their wife died of a heart attack because she didn't want to go to the hospital.
Yep.
And so there were so many different things. And I was like, this is causing so much trauma. And that's when I started doing Mathis Barker. I don't know if you know him, but he does childhood trauma on TikTok. And I've taken some of his workshops, and I was like, there's a lot to unpack with trauma that people don't even realize that is what they're doing. They've just lived in a state for their entire life of freeze or fawn or all of flight. And they don't know that that's what trauma is. And once you start unpacking it, it can be a lot.
Oh yeah. I still, one of the things for me is I love to keep learning. Like learning is one of my absolute favorite things to do. And so I love being in this field because it's so new. Trauma is not new. We've experienced trauma for as long as we've been alive as humans. The rate at which our socio-political economic normal is changing, however, and the rate at which we are creating actual physical and financial safety for people is so much higher that now we actually have the time and the capacity and the space to look at these things. And I'm really excited, just talking about the medical field. I went and spoke to a Ohio chapter of pediatric nurse practitioners, and I said, okay, so how many of you are familiar with trauma informed care? Like have heard that term? And maybe like, I don't know, a third, half of their hands went up. And I said, okay, if I held out a $50 bill and said, anyone who can define that for me gets this, who could do it? And one person raised their hand in a room of maybe 50, 60 people.
Wow.
And I was like, this is a problem. This is a problem. And I mean, I learned about this my last year of my doctoral program at an optional training that I decided to go to because it sounded interesting. And I didn't even know they were going to be talking about that. And so like, I feel it felt very divine intervention that's what happened when I happened to like go to that training. I was like, I walked out feeling 3 emotions. I felt validated. I was like, oh my gosh, this explains my entire life. I felt like just kind of shocked and a little numb of having my world rocked around, oh, this is what's going on. And I was pissed because I was like, why is this not mandatory education for every single person who takes care of someone else? Educators, healthcare providers, like honestly, first responders. And that is why the content that we have at the Institute exists, because we want to ensure that we have the trauma informed parent, we have the trauma informed entrepreneur, we have, this year we're doing, or in 2023 we're going to be doing things for people in real estate, people in the financial markets, HR professionals, educators, mental health professionals, healthcare providers. Like, we're trying to go in and give this education to all of these people that I'm like, I know they're going to feel the same way I felt. Those three feelings of like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Holy shit, how did I not know this? And like, what have we been doing?
Yeah.
And what's the impact of that? So I feel you so deeply, and like, just listening to your story around what happened to you, I'm over here going like, yes, absolutely, everyone should not leave the hospital against medical advice. And also, like, good for you, because and that's another place we're going with education. Actually, 4 of the 6 of us on the on staff at the Institute are healthcare providers. So we want to put together a workshop that's called the Empowered Patient, so that you can understand, as a patient with no medical background or training, like, this is how you advocate for yourself. This is what your provider is thinking. Like, this is how you want to say things or ask for things in order to be heard. Like, these are your rights. This is what you're allowed to have happen. And so I just got really excited about your story, because I was like, oh, she was so empowered. And like, that's what we want people to have, is you're allowed to say, hey, why am I getting this med? Hey, why are you doing what you're doing? And by the way, the reason that you didn't walk, I would bet dollars to donuts, was not because it was going to be hard for you. It was because it was going to be hard for the staff to get you up with everything you were connected to. It was going to be a pain in the butt. And it's so much easier to just give you a shot of blood thinners in your belly.
Yep. I would love to volunteer if you need to pick brains, because I have been in and out. My first surgery, I was 1. I had a double hernia, and then I ended up having an autoimmune. They never could pinpoint it what it was. I had a bone marrow, all the things. I just have a low white blood count. Like, it rests really low. So it's good that there's no like defined, but when something happens, like I lose those white blood cells, which makes it more scary, you know, especially like they pump me up with prednisone and everything. But I have been in and out of the hospital so much. And I would say most of my trauma in my life is medical induced.
Sure.
And when people talk about like childhood trauma, like I definitely have childhood trauma, but that, like, I don't live there anymore. Like, that's a different time and space. But the scars I have as an adult from my surgeries, and like them thinking that I was just pill seeking, and I'm like, I don't want pain meds. Like, don't give me the pain meds. Figure out why this is happening. But unfortunately, and it's not something we need to get into today, but I honestly believe that I didn't get the care that I needed, which is what led me to not be able to have children. Like, I had to have a complete hysterectomy when I had just turned 30. And when I was out recovering from one of my surgeries, I had my ovary removed, and I had switched doctors, and then I had a full hysterectomy a year later. But in that interim of me healing from the first surgery, the previous doctor that I went to called me and was like, you haven't scheduled your follow-up for your ultrasound, because I had been in the emergency room. And I was like, they removed that ovary already.
Oh,
like, you're a little late for that. Because she just was like, here's antidepressants. I'm like, I'm not depressed. Like, you're just not listening. I had asked her, I was like, just go in and look at my ovary. Take the ovary if you need to. There's something wrong with it. And by the time they had waited, everything was just, my endometriosis had spread. I had cysts so bad. And the doctor was like, you're on borrowed time. And it was almost a year. I had lost my left ovary on June 7th and had a full hysterectomy on June 14th, a year later. So like, I get so angry because I feel like for 13 years, doctors weren't listening to me. And I'm like, I remember one doctor that had said, and I get it, like, a lot of it is mental health, and like, we do get sick because we don't process our emotions. But a doctor had said, I think you're just depressed. And I was like, I've had a period for 6 months and your answer is depression. That's not
so common.
It's not the case.
Well, and also it's a both and. Sure. Yeah. Am I feeling depressed, or like, is my mood maybe down a little bit because I've been handling this? Absolutely. That's not the solution. You giving
Right.
me an antidepressant is slapping a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. And
Yeah.
that's not, and you know, this is also, so in 2 weeks, I'm coming up on 2 years out of clinical practice. And a year, I gave myself a year when I first left. I was like, because it's not, what I did is not normal for healthcare providers. You don't leave and like not stay PRN or like pick up a shift every now and then in order to maintain your skills, right? So I was like, I'm going to give myself a year because that is still reasonable. If I decide that I want to go back to the bedside, no one's going to be like, where have you been? What have you been doing?
Right.
And for the week before December 5th last year, I was a wreck and I couldn't figure out why. I was like, why am I all panicky again? Like, why do I feel so awful? And then I realized, I said, oh, because in 5 days, you have to quote unquote decide if you're going back or not, and you don't want to. And so the minute I realized that, I was like, oh, okay, we're not going back. We're giving it another year. We'll explain it. We started a freaking institute. If somebody has a problem with that, then we don't want to work for them anyway.
Right.
And coming up on this 2-year anniversary now, I'm like, I don't think I can go back. I don't think I can go back in any sort of capacity that I did before. And it's not because, at the risk of sounding like cocky, I was a really good clinician. I was a really good clinician.
I get that vibe from you.
And it was what one of my favorite authors, Gay Hendricks, he wrote The Big Leap. I don't know if you've read it. He talks about the difference between your zone of excellence and your zone of genius. And it was like,
I have heard about that.
Yeah. Being a clinician was my zone of excellence. I was good at it. It worked. I was relatively happy at it. And trauma work became my zone of genius because there's just so much more passion behind it. And knowing that I get to wake up every day and like talk to people like you around your stories and hear that trauma and like, and us being able to put this out to other people so then they can go, oh my gosh, I have medical trauma. Oh my gosh, the doctors never listened to me. Mm-hmm. Right? Which is such a common thing.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many patients I had that I had to go in and advocate for them and be like, something is not right.
Yeah.
And how many stories I heard from people of saying like, I tried to say something was right, not right, and no one listened, and look where it ended up. Mm-hmm. You know, I just feel like I'm also somebody, I am a huge believer, and I feel like that this is like divinely what I was meant to do. Like, this is the purpose that I was put on the planet for now. And I had to go through everything that I did, including that decade plus as a clinician, to be like, no, not anymore, because I can help so many more people. Same way like you're helping so many people through things like this, rather than one patient at a time at the bedside that I can't necessarily even do what I really want to do for them.
There is a story that, side note, and I'm putting a trigger warning on it, but I have everything happens for a reason tattooed to my right arm, because it's not always right, but it happens for a reason for everybody on my so like there was a couple times in life that I remember texting my sister, and I had my phone in between on my lap, and I had my hands in there, and she's like, look at your arm, like this is going to be okay, it happened for a reason. But one of my friends, I'm not really friends with him anymore, but when I got it, he was like, really, everything happens for a reason? And I was like, yeah. He's like, do you think a little kid gets molested for a reason? And I was like, I hate to say yes, but yes, because there's going to be something. Do I want that to happen for somebody? No, but like there's a reason that happens, because those people like you, when you start unpacking all your ish, you've now helped so many other people that can do things. Like, obviously I don't want bad things to happen. That is like, I wish I could prevent all of that, but I'm not God, and like there's evil in the world, but those things turn into such bigger things where it's a ripple effect. Like, I would hope that that doesn't happen, but I would hope that if it does, that somebody can unpack all of that and then they can go help other people and, adopt kids or start a business or write a book. And like, it's the ripple effect of how many people we can impact. And, you realizing, like, going into the medical field, like, you knew and saw that these things. And when you started unpacking your own, you're like, I can help other people. And that is just insanely incredible. And you don't even know how many people you've impacted, where when you go to the hospital, you're like, okay, well, does patient A and patient B are who I'm supposed to be checking on today. And instead, like, now you have this whole platform where it's not just helping the people that you're teaching, it's helping their children, it's helping their spouses, it's helping generational, teaching different generational. There's a thing, and I'm sure you've heard about it, where the chickens were on a wire and they would zap the wire. And when the chickens laid an egg and those chickens grew up, they jumped and they couldn't figure out, like, the chickens just jumped because their parent had jumped because they were zapped on this wire. And then they just kept going. And I've heard this story morph into so many different things now. And it's crazy because it's true. It's like, a learned behavior. So, like, you helping other people are going to be able to help their kids so that their kids cannot be in a freeze or flight or fawn and all the other different things, which is absolutely incredible that you're doing that. So I know it might be weird that you're not doing it, but you're still helping and you're healing people. It's just not with medication and IVs and surgery.
Which I like, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I like, and we just finished up our first round of our Trama Informed Psychologically Safe Certificate program in October. And we were asking people at the end, like, what's the best thing you got out of this? And so many of them who are parents or who are, like, intimately connected with kids, they're like, I have fundamentally changed how I show up with the young people in my life. And, like, I feel that way. I can look at how I parented before I did all this work and how I parent now. And I had an absolutely transformative conversation with my oldest kiddo just like a week or two ago. And I was like, wow, we could have never had that conversation before this. Those kids know that they belong and that they're safe and that they're loved and that they're accepted as they are. And they know the difference between us, us parenting them around their behavior and their actions versus who they are as humans. And I am just, there's actually this phenomenon we talk about where sometimes you resent your kids because they're getting something you didn't get. You're parenting them in a way that you didn't get parented.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that. And also now there's just such a deep form of, like, gratitude that it's like, okay, like, this got to stop with me.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful. And that's, I think, what this work gives you, is you get to go, what's stopping with me? What am I no longer putting out to the world? And, like, how am I no longer spreading the harm and the hurt that I got? Going back to that for, our beginning of our conversation.
Yeah. Hurt people.
Yeah. If I can heal my hurt, I'm going to hurt other people less. Mm-hmm. And then they're going to hurt other people less. And then they're going to hurt other people less. And so, do I wish what I went through on my worst enemy? No. Would I do it again? Maybe not. Am I gonna take what happened to me and find the meaning in it? Yes.
Yep. Absolutely. I love it. I feel like I could talk to you all day long. I'm sure this is going to be a well-listened podcast episode for sure. There was so much to unpack. Is there anything else you were wanting to talk about today?
I think we covered a lot.
Yeah. I definitely feel like it's funny. People are like, I don't know what I could talk about for an hour, because I do short blurps and then I do hour episodes. And I'm like, I assure you, once I get you on, we will be here.
Yeah, that's never a problem for me. I'm like, tell me my time limit, because that's what I need to know.
I always say, like, I want to be on a TED Talk, and I'm like, but you can only talk for 15
No.
minutes on a TED Talk.
No.
I don't know if I could do that.
Nope, I'm going to run my own conferences and talk for 3 days. Thank you.
Yes, that's how I would prefer it. Thank you very much. But yeah, I feel like you covered so many different things, and I think what you're doing is incredible. And I know that some of the guests that I've had on podcast, the biggest takeaway that they said is they got tired of feeling the way that they were feeling, and they chose to have a better life and to get out of the modes they were in. So you're making an impact. The ripples are great, and hopefully I'll have you again on future episodes. If you would like to come back, you're more than welcome to, because I'm sure we can touch on way more topics. But if people want to find you and follow you, where can they get you?
Yeah. So obviously y'all are podcast fans. We actually have a podcast called Becoming Trama Informed. There's like 60 plus episodes of there to just go binge if that's your jam. And we have all of our offerings, free, paid, and upcoming, everything from hour to hour long free trainings to our 9-month and 18-month certifications on our website, institutefortrauma.com.
Awesome. And I'll put that in the show notes so they can follow you. Thank you so much for being here today. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk about this today.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Well, that's all we have for today's podcast. We thank you so much for joining, and I hope that you have a fantastic day, and we will catch you next time with the Joss and Crowd podcast.